and get started. Right on. And if anyone joins us, that would be great. Cool. Well, welcome everyone to our second webinar of our 7 webinar series at the Stu Clark Center. Today is all about validation, why and how, essentially validating your business idea right from the start so that you can really prove that there's a market that exists for your business. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started into the content of the webinar today. A couple Zoom etiquette items that we'd love for you to keep in mind throughout the webinar. Video is optional, as I mentioned, but please do stay on mute throughout the webinar. We are going to be using the chat feature to ask any questions that you might have. So please, at any point in time throughout the webinar, if a question comes up that you have, please enter it in the chat and we'll get it to it after. Also, feel free to just pop the letter Q in the chat if you don't want to read out or type out your entire question, and then you can hop off mute during the Q&A and ask your question live as well. And lastly, but not least, the webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the online resource section of our Stu Clark website. So don't hesitate to forward that on to anyone else that you think might value from watching this webinar. And or if you have to leave early and can't watch the remainder of the webinar, you can find it online. So a little bit to start, I'm going to tell you a little bit briefly about who I am. My name is Josh Zaporzan. I'm the venture coach at the Stu Clark Center for Entrepreneurship School of Business back in December of 2016, and currently working as the venture coach at the Stu Clark Center, where I get to meet with students across all faculties in the university and get to coach them who are, if they're pursuing their own ideas for a venture, help and support them however I can, whether that through building business plans, helping raise capital, market research, or whatever the case may be. I also am an entrepreneur myself. I'm the owner and president of Odax Ventures, which is a holding company that owns a few other different business investments, including Longbow Athletics, which I was recently the CEO for and ran. I also work as the Manitoba Market Manager for the League of Innovators and the Vice Chair of the Young Associates here in Manitoba. So a little bit about me. Before we get into the content, quickly introduce our Stu Clark team. Deborah Jonason Young is our director, Amy Jones, our program coordinator, and Lindsay Friesen, our office administrator. This is the squad at the Stu Clark Center. If you have any questions about what we do or how you can be involved or any resources that you need access to or any help with your startup, please never hesitate to reach out to anyone /entrepreneur or on Instagram at Stu Clark Center. So we are here to help and support your entrepreneurial journey however best we can. So please do not hesitate to reach out. In case you missed it, a couple weeks ago on September 16th, we had our first webinar, which was No Idea, No Problem, where we really talked about idea creation and how to be an entrepreneur without having a revolutionary idea. The webinar, again, was recorded, and you can find it on our website, umanitoba.ca/entrepreneur. When you go onto the site, you can find the online resource section on the side and scroll to the bottom of that page, and you can find the recording. And that's where this recording will be as well after today's webinar. All right, so today, what we're going to talk about, we're going to try and keep the content a little bit shorter today. The reason being is historically, whenever I've done a talk around validation, there tends to be a fair bit more questions around validation and how to validate and what to do and what does research look like? What does this mean? So we're going to try and keep the content a little bit shorter today. There's a couple key messages I want to get across to everyone in order to really help spark some validation mindsets to everyone in terms of their startup. So we'll talk about defining what validation is and why it's important, problem discovery and finding customers, product market fit. We're going to look into research and the types of research that you can do to help validate your idea. And I've created a list of some top 6 ways to validate your problem and your idea that I follow as well with a lot of the students that I coach and mentor, and even in my own business practice as well. A reminder, any questions throughout, don't hesitate, pop them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. I want to make sure we have time to answer all your questions. So even if you have entrepreneurial related questions, but aren't necessarily related to validation, don't hesitate to ask. All right, I want to get started by learning more about all of you that are on this webinar. So I have a very short poll that I would love to launch here. And I would love for you to take the time to answer. Please note that the poll is 100% anonymous. So please feel free to go ahead and vote. I'll give everyone a couple seconds here to do so. Cool, just about everyone's voted. Awesome, awesome. All right, oh, a couple more votes coming in. Cool. We'll end the poll and we'll check out the results. Cool. So we got 25% yes, 75% no, but you want to be. Awesome. Well, glad you're all here. And hopefully for those of you that want to be an entrepreneur, this webinar and some of our webinar series will absolutely help you to be one and to help and give you the guidance and support needed. And for those of you that are, awesome to have you here as well to further help and support you along your journey as well. Now, there's always one comment that I make before doing any speech or talk or conversation to a group of individuals, and that really being is that I don't have all the answers, and nor do I really think that anyone does. And this at its essence is really the power and importance of creativity, innovation, persistence, and entrepreneurship, the fact that we're always learning. I don't know everything, but I've learned a lot through experience about business and entrepreneurship. And today and through this webinar series, I really want to share with you all of those lessons that I've learned. So please don't hesitate to ask. I am by no means claiming to be an expert on the topic of validation, but the goal of today is really to share my real world experiences and hopefully draw a connection to your entrepreneurial journey as well. Okay, I'm loving this this poll feature in Zoom. So I thought, well, let's start off with another poll here. I'd love for you guys to guess how many startups fail. I'm going to pop open the next poll here and take a guess. If you think 10% of startups fail, 30, 50, 70, 90, or none. I'll give you a couple seconds to vote and we'll see what everyone thinks. Again, the polls are completely anonymous, so it'd be awesome to if you could participate, but don't feel obligated to do so. I'll give you a couple more seconds for those of you to fill out the poll. Awesome. Okay, we will end the poll and let's share the results here. Okay, 50% of all of you said 90%, 25% said 50%, 17% of you said 70%, and 8% said 30%. Awesome, those are great guesses, really great guesses. Well, the answer is 90%. So the majority of you were correct. So right on for being correct on the poll there. Now, that's a lot of startups. And there's so many reasons why startups fail. But there's one reason in particular why the majority of startups do fail. And so we're going to go back to the poll one more time. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the reason why most startups fail? Why do you think 90% of startups fail? What main reason? Again, completely anonymous poll. Would love to have to hear what you think. Perfect. Just about everyone's voted. Awesome. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Very interesting mix of votes here. Very cool. Cool to see. Yes, Panos, the poll feature is probably one of my favorite things of Zoom as well. Couple more seconds. Anyone who hasn't voted, please feel free to do so if you'd like. Oh, there we go. Awesome. We'll end the poll and let's share the results. So 38% of you said no market need, 23% bad marketing, 15 and 15 ran out of money and not the right team, and 8% said poor product service. Very cool. Thank you for the participation. Now, it's awesome to see that 38% of you said that there's no market need. Essentially, I guess one of the reasons why we're having the webinar today and the topic of validation is because you are correct. 42% of those 90% of startups that fail is because there's no market need. People create businesses, they build products, they build services, but they haven't validated that it exists in the world and they have no product market fit. And it's the leading reason why startups fail. You can see some of the other most notable ones are that they ran out of cash, they don't have the right team. They're all higher rates too, but look how much higher no market need is than every other reason for why startups fail. It's so important, this topic of validation and research and where do you begin with all this. It's so important for the success of long-term ventures, which is why it's awesome to have all of you here today learning about it. So you got a great idea. That's brilliant. Let's validate it. My favorite quote or comment to make in terms of validation, and if there's one key thing that I would really love all of you to take away from this webinar today, is that the value is in really what gets used, not what gets built. The art of validating that your problem exists and that there are people in this world that would use and pay for your product or service is really the key to validation. Again, the value is in what gets used, not what gets built. If you can't build something that won't get used, then what's the point? And why risk going through all the work and all the money to build something without knowing if people will use it, let alone pay for it? So what is this validation? What is this big validation word? It's a question I hear a lot, especially when coaching young entrepreneurs. And market validation is really the process of determining whether your product is of interest to a given target market. Market validation involves a series of interviews and research of people within your target market, and it almost always takes place before you've made a significant investment into your product or concept. Different priorities every day, from your business to hiring a team to generating sales, but the viability of your product is absolutely crucial. Customer validation has always been one of the best ways to eliminate wasted effort and shortcut directly to what will work. So before launching, you really want to validate market demand, customer pain points, and the product or service itself. Through this process, you can avoid pouring more effort into faulty, incomplete, or undesired products. At this early stage, though, you start by validating your idea or concept. Initial validation does not need to be a complex experiment. I don't want any of you to think that you have to go out and get 1,000 different survey responses or interview 2,000 people and get all this feedback. It doesn't have to be that complex. It can be as simple as really creating a clear description of the thing you're interested in developing and just having a couple people validate that, hey, yeah, that problem exists and it's a problem in my life, and that solution is a good solution for it and something that I would pay for. Really, at the end of the day, answering those questions of, will people use my product or service, and will people pay for using my product or service? So why is this important? The value of market validation is that your startup can uncover all of those problems before committing any significant time or resource to a product concept. That makes this the most inexpensive way to learn that an idea isn't worth pursuing. Validation helps us understand not only if our idea is solid, but it also helps us know what the best ways and channels are to market our target audience after we've built and released the product. So to iron out the wrinkles, we should understand that validation marketing is a validation process that plays a significant role in the success of a product or startup after its launch. Knowing your target market and having conducted thorough research, interviews, and talking to people, it's important, but it's not always enough. The way from idea initiation to product launch and then to product market fit, which we're going to talk about a little bit today as well, is long. And validation is really the element that can shorten that distance to really ensuring that when you do launch your product or service, it's going to scale, it's going to take off, and it's going to grow. Gone are those days of, if you build it, they will come. The danger of ideas are that we're inherently biased regarding them. It's simply human nature. 9 out of 10 times, we've created a revolutionary idea to solve a problem that we personally have experienced. Although, solutions, maybe sound like it's $1 million solution to you, and perhaps your friends and family think the same thing, but you're going to need a significant amount of others to agree in order for you to have validated your market. So that's really the why to why it's important. So I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about problem discovery, because you can't fully market or validate your business and your product if you don't fully understand your problem that you're solving. Understanding the problem you're solving is so important in order to building that foundation of your business and kickstarting the validation process. In the last webinar, we talked about asking why 5 times in order to get to the root problem, the root cause. And I encourage you, all of you who weren't able to watch that webinar, to go back, have a look, and learn about really finding the root problem. Because at the end of the day, if you can't properly identify what that problem is and discover what it is, it's going to be so much harder to do proper validation and to continue furthering on the spectrum of building your business. 4 of the kind of biggest areas to problem discovery is looking at that root cause, asking why 5 times, identify what that problem is and really what you're solving. Look at assumptions, a thing that is accepted as true or certain without proof or evidence. Observation of a situation or interaction without engaging with it. You're gaining insight. And talk. A big part of what you're going to hear me mention today in all of my messaging is about talking. Seems straightforward, but a lot of people have difficulty with it, and that's okay. But having the courage and going out there in order to interview all the stakeholders that experience or solve or are related to your problem is so important. If you can't identify your root problem and your target market, you won't get through proper validation required to start a business. So what is this product market fit? Product market fit describes a scenario in which a company's target customers are buying, using, and telling others about the company's product in numbers large enough that to sustain the product's growth and profitability. So according to an entrepreneur and investor, Mark Anderson, I believe his name is, he's often credited with developing this. He talks about finding a good market with a product capable of satisfying that market. And I love the 2 graphics on the screen because it really illustrates that both your product and your market are 2 very different segments. But if there's no overlap and if there's no fit, then you won't have a successful business. Alex Schultz, the Facebook's VP of growth, he says that the biggest problem he sees facing companies that he advises is that they don't have product market fit when they think they do. The answer is simple as to why achieving product market fit is so important. Before you develop a product that you can confirm enough people are willing to pay for, your team can't afford to focus on other important strategic objectives, such as growth or upselling to existing users. Those initiatives could even be counterproductive. In fact, if you haven't first determined that your product has enough of a market to sustain itself and generate a profit in, it's probably not going to be successful. So some of my biggest key tips and takeaways in order to finding product market fit is to, again, go back and determine your target customer, identify and understand the needs of that customer, define your value proposition, look at the market, what else is existing, really look at what your MVP feature will look like, build that out and test it. Again, test. So super important. We're going to switch gears here and talk about research, because research plays a big part of validation, product market fit, and really understanding at the end of the day if your product and service is validated and feasible within the market. So let's look quickly at this research process, and then we'll go into a little bit more in depth about conducting research after this. The major components and the biggest thing that I want to highlight on this slide is that the research process is a circle. It never ends. With research, you're always refining, you're always revisiting, and you're potentially pivoting with your idea once you're being able to analyze the results that you're getting. So essentially, you really want to start by conducting research, both primary and secondary, which we'll talk about in a second, evaluate those results, and then you're going to be able to come to a conclusion of whether you can successfully validate or you have to pivot. Even if you validated that, you still might pivot, which is a good thing. And you still might have, if once you're done collecting research, that you're done. You getting feedback, doing research, and evaluating so that you're always making changes, especially in this fast-paced, ever-changing environment and business culture that we live in and work in. Things are always changing, and you want to be able to get feedback so that your product and service is continually being up to what your target customers are looking for. So let's dive a little bit more into the types of research, both primary and secondary. Primary research is really research that you personally compile and format. It's also known as original research. So whether it's collecting interviews or doing interviews with individuals, doing surveys, looking at studies that you do yourself, it's really collecting that data and information on your own, going out and talking to people. Why is this so important? This is so important because primary research is really going to open up that window of knowledge in terms of your target customers, your product and your service, how people feel about what it is that you're working on and that you're doing. And it's such an important piece of research that can't be overlooked. The second is secondary research. And secondary research is really information that's compiled and formatted using already existing data. So it's information that's already out there, whether it be through peer-reviewed articles, Stats Canada, provincial government studies. I mean, you look at as students, a majority of you on this webinar, the access of the information you have access to through the U of M libraries is so huge from a research perspective. There's so much secondary research that can be done in order to collect data and help validate your idea. So I then asked the question of where do I start? Is it with primary research? Is it with secondary research? I would love to get your feedback. Perfect. So what type of research do you think you should start with? Primary, secondary, or none at all? Again, it's completely anonymous. Awesome. Just about everyone's voted. Love to see it. Thank you for your participation. All right, let's end the poll and let's share the results. Cool. 54% of you said secondary research, 46% said primary research. Interesting split. So here's my thoughts. Where do we start? We start with secondary research. And here's why. Secondary research really helps you narrow down your specifics before you start talking to people. It really starts to identify more of a customer segment, more from a websites, Google Scholar, Harvard Business Review, and honestly, Google. I know a lot of people will disagree, but not a great method to search and to rely on some information, but it doesn't hurt. The more, the merrier, as they say. And so the more that you can Google and find out and research and find out data and information, the better. So don't hesitate to use it. But don't also rely on just one form of research. You always want to be looking and confirming and relooking and looking at more places in order to really validate and understand if what you're reading is true and accurate. And again, as students, the access you have to the U of M libraries, super important as well. So then primary research. How do we conduct primary research? Well, at the end of the day, the best primary research is that it's time to get out there and talk to people. And don't just talk to family and friends. I know I hear from so many people that I meet with is, oh, you know what? Yeah, I've got some great feedback. And I ask, well, who'd you talk? And although that's great, it is awesome to talk to them and get their feedback. You can't solely rely on it, or I would highly advise against it. And the reason why is because your family and friends are some of your most supportive individuals in your life. And regardless of whether if your idea is really great, not so great, or maybe unsure if it's great, chances are higher that they're still going to give you supportive feedback, which is great. You need supportive feedback, and you need that support group and individuals in your life to help you, especially through going through a talk to actual users and other people that are in that product market fit and customer target segment. You want to go and talk to them, whether it be through surveys, through interviews, paid online ads, through going and just observing people and how they act or how they respond in certain situations. And one of my favorite comments to say is a lot of individuals will say, well, how do I go do this? How do I go talk to someone? How do I just call up a business and ask them questions? My biggest piece of advice is to play the student card. I know it might sound silly, but I even know people who are not students anymore that still play the student card. And that being, you call up a business and say, hey, I'm a student at the Asper School of Business or at the University of Manitoba, and I'm working on this exciting project. Do you have 10 to 15 minutes can I have 10 to 15 minutes of your time to ask you your thoughts, to get your feedback? Individuals and companies are more likely to talk to students working on projects than if you just cold call and say, hey, I'm entering this market, I need some feedback. Play the student card. Trust me, it helps, it works. Use it to your advantage. It definitely is huge in helping conduct that primary research. So the next two slides before we kind of wrap up this conversation, date your idea. And these are kind of the all of you to be able to go away from this webinar. The first one, again, is to talk about it often. You can never talk enough. Meet with people who are affected by the problem, not just family and friends. Build and send out surveys. One of the best ways to collect data and information is through surveys. Do your research. Look at what's already out there. Look at the market. Is it working? Why is it not working if something isn't working? And why is something working if it is working? Know what your root problem is and who your target customer is. So important in order to being able to actually validate the real problem that you're trying to solve. And don't stop talking about it. Reframe your questions as you learn more and send feedback. Never stop talking about it. You should never be scared to share what you're working on, because that's the only way that you're going to get that really, really valuable validation and feedback. I love this quote from Winston Churchill saying that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts, meaning validation never ends. Even if it's bad, even if you don't find that something's not feasible, keep going, keep finding new research. You can pivot. And it's such a great way and stage to learn that early rather than later. A couple final tactics for figuring out all of that early validation. These are some of the key questions and items that I like to look at personally when going through the validation stage. The first one is gathering information about the market. And if you can quantify as much as possible, you're going to be way ahead of the game. So looking at who is already in the space and how many people are in the space. How big is the market? Let's get an actual quantitative value in terms of how big is that potential market that we're going to sell to or attract to. What are others doing to solve this problem already? If so, if not, then that's okay too. Have there been failed solutions to this problem in the past? If so, why? And I would also add to that list too is what has worked and what can change? What can, even if something's working, what can make that thing even better? Secondly, again, going back to creating surveys to get feedback on your concept. Use tools like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms to create formal surveys that you can send out. I've seen a lot of successful young entrepreneurs send out a Google survey on a paid Facebook ad. They spent $2 or $5 a day on an ad for a week or two, and they keyed in their target customers of age, demographic, who they want that advertisement to be viewed. They've offered an incentive for people to fill out the survey, for example, a $25 gift card, and they've collected hundreds and hundreds of responses for a 5-question survey. Leverage that. I think it's a great way to use social media and free forms online in order to get some great validation and feedback. And the last one is really about around an idea of a focus group, whether that be in person or on a call or on Zoom or within a select group of individuals that could really understand what it is that you're working on and how, to get really honest feedback and to generate new perspectives on your product or service. So those are really my tactics for early validation. I want to emphasize again that you can't build a successful business with a flawed foundation. Validation is so crucial to that foundational piece of your business. Go find customers and talk to people. Don't be scared to share your idea. If you keep your idea inside and you're scared to share people with it because you're scared that they're going to copy it or whatnot, you're not really going to get ahead. You're not going to be able to properly validate. So I encourage you to do that, to go outside a little bit of your comfort zone and share. Talk to as many people as possible. As an entrepreneur, you need to spend time on proving that there is a place in the market for your product or service and that there are people out there who would both use it and pay for it. Remember, these are those foundational pieces that's going to help build a successful business in the long term. So a couple key takeaways from today's webinar. The value is in what gets used, not what gets built. Super important. Validation helps us understand not only if our idea is solid, but it also helps us know what the best ways and channels to market to our target audience after we've built out our product or service. Validation starts by understanding your root problem and really defining that target market so you know who to go after in terms of validation and gathering that primary research. Start with secondary research, narrow and refine, and then go talk to people. Actively ask for feedback and be open for change. Instead of asking, hey, what do you like about this idea? Ask, what's wrong? What would you change? Be open for that critical feedback and be ready to pivot if you need to. Always be refining, always be pivoting, always be looking at how you can make something better. And lastly, you can't build a successful business with a flawed foundation. So start by searching for product market fit. Get out of the building, talk to customers, run a series of experiments to validate your ideas. Above all else, validating your thinking as early as possible. You don't need to spend millions or thousands or even hundreds of dollars building something before you have tested the ideas and concepts with customers, real customers. Where this tends to fall down in practice is that many entrepreneurs find it hard to reach real customers. Getting feedback from co-founders, from friends, from small focus groups, from user testing sessions, and even existing customers from other competing products can all be very, very helpful to qualitatively understand how others view your offering. But many times the sample group that you can reach, it's too small and biased towards people that will be polite to you or who have self-identified as liking your product. So beware of that. Step outside of your comfort zone and talk to people. You really never know what you might learn. As always, we understand that as an entrepreneur, you can't do it alone. There's so many great resources in the community to help you get through and support your entrepreneurial journey, including doing a lot of that research. These are a couple on the screen of our community resources at the Stu Clark Center. And if you're interested to learn more about them, feel free to send us a message. One specifically to highlight is the World Trade Center, who is a tremendous, tremendous resource in terms of doing market validation research as well. Just remember, you're never alone, and no matter what stage you're at in the business planning cycle, there is help and support for you in the community. And also, as students and as individuals in the community, you always have the opportunity to meet directly with me, the venture coach, the Stu Clark Center for Entrepreneurship. So don't hesitate to reach out and book a meeting through our website with me as well, where we can talk more about validation and specifically with your idea. One final more note before we get to questions, just a reminder, our third webinar of the 7 webinar series is on October 14th, and it's going to be a fun webinar where we're going to really dive into the perfect pitch, all about pitching your business idea, how to do that, how to engage with your judge or your venture capitalist that you're pitching to, or even your friends. So it's going to be an exciting webinar. So please go to our website and RSVP for that one if you are interested in attending. With that being said, I would like to open it up to questions if anyone has anything that they would like to ask.
Don't be shy, guys. Any questions, put them in the chat and we'll answer them right away. Josh, there was a little bit of connection issues while you were presenting, but I told them that this recording is going to be online so they can reference it at any time.
Awesome. Anyone got questions? Market validation, entrepreneurship, the Stu Clark Center.
And remember, if you guys are too shy to ask questions, you can always book a one-on-one meeting with Josh through our website. Oh, we got a question. When stakeholders include the government and large institutions like insurance companies, how would you suggest to approach them?
That's a good question. I would say, you know what, the best way to do it in order to reach out and approach is to find, well, I'll go back a little bit. The best way to approach anyone is through a connection, through a mutual connection. If you know someone that maybe works within the government or a larger institution, ask them if there's someone there that they can intro you to. A lot more people, from my experience, are more willing to meet with individuals that maybe there's a mutual connection with. If that's not the case, though, that's completely okay. I would recommend doing some research online, looking up who the different departments are, and maybe just finding one email or one phone number, and just starting there, asking them. And if they're not the right person to talk to in order for answering your questions, ask them who maybe would be, and if they can direct you to someone who can. But the best piece of advice is really just to pick up the phone or send an email and just start somewhere with a phone number within the large institutions or organizations, and eventually you'll get to someone who can properly answer your questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. Would you help also in setting questions up for a survey? Coming up with fundamental questions is not very easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely is the short answer. I'd love to help with you to build out that survey. So feel free to book a meeting with me online through our website, and I can definitely help you with coming up some survey questions with your specific validation that you need. In terms of a survey, you know what, I think it's really beneficial to keep things short. You never really want to kind of go between that 3 to 5 question max is kind of what I recommend, but absolutely can help you guide with some survey questions for sure.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. Maybe we'll leave it open for another minute here to see if there's any other questions. And a reminder, guys, follow us on social media. We post all our updates there about upcoming webinars, social media contests, and some fun facts. So please go follow us there. And Josh, it's looking like that's it for today.
That's it. That's all. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us today. Oh, I think there's another
We have
question.
one last one. After conducting research, interviews, surveys, how do you know if you should move forward with the results? For instance, if 10% of the participants answered they need a product.
Yeah, I think once you do a lot of research and validation, that'll become evident. And the biggest thing that I would say is as you're conducting some of that research, you're going to hear not only if it's critical or negative in terms of that those individuals wouldn't use your product or service. I think that's why it's important to have those follow-up questions in terms of, okay, well, what would make you want to use this so that you can then pivot your idea. So I would make the argument that it's not necessarily a decision of whether you shouldn't move forward with your idea after some validation. It's more about how do I pivot to change this idea and reframe those questions to something different where then I can collect more information and data to see if that changes or I can change my product or service. You mentioned if 10% of the participants answered they need a product. I wouldn't quantify it too much in terms of how many there are. I think that just indicates how large the size of the market is for you to address in terms of your customer segment group. So I wouldn't try and stick with a certain number. I think all feedback is great feedback and it just provides a great opportunity for pivoting. I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know.
Perfect. And then one more. Market validation is an ongoing process at every stage of business growth. And they put a question. So maybe you could just talk a little bit more towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's validation is an ongoing process, I think. And the reason why is because, especially in today's competitive landscape and in the business environment, things are always changing. There's always new competition coming out. There's always new things or new regulations. And so validating any new products or new changes to your existing products is so important to do. You always have to be refining. You always have to be talking to customers. You always have to be learning about what it is that people like and don't like about your product or service, even after it's out in the marketplace, so that you can keep making it better. So absolutely, it's an ongoing process, and I encourage it at every stage of the business growth. Now, that looks different a little bit at every stage. It's not necessarily the exact same as when in the startup phase versus through the growth phase and launch phase, but it still definitely has to be a key piece of that business cycle.
Perfect. And all of these processes the same for a consulting company as well?
Yes, no matter what the business is, the research and validation doesn't change and it shouldn't change. Any product or service business.
Okay, I think that's it.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today and for the engagement and the questions. Appreciate it. Hope you all took something of value from this webinar, and I hopefully look forward to seeing all of you at our next webinar about the pitch. Thanks again, and I hope all you all have a great day.